Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny is now urging the people of his country to stage daily protest against Vladimir Putin for his invasion of Ukraine. Meanwhile, back at home, President Biden issued a rallying cry during his State of the Union address to unite the nation and the world against Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine, as he vows to make Russia's leader pay for unleashing war in Europe.
Russia's Vladimir Putin sought to shake the very foundations of the free world, thinking he could make it bend to his menacing ways. But he badly miscalculated. He thought he could roll into Ukraine and the world would roll over. Instead, he met with a wall of strength he never anticipated or imagined. He met the Ukrainian people.
Brett, when you think about State of the Unions, I think about landmark moments, historic moments. We all remember Johnson laying out what we now know as the war on poverty, the axis of evil comment by President Bush, Bill Clinton pivoting, saying the era of big government is over. I don't recall a line last night, a moment like that last night, that will make this State of the Union go down in history. Your thoughts?
Definitely not. And it was a speech that was workmanlike. It was the traditional shopping list of a president trying to get things done from Congress, a Congress that is divided and not getting what he wants done. The speech was not really inspiring. It wasn't lofty. There is unity on the Ukraine issue, and you have to give the Biden administration credit for reaching out to all these NATO and EU countries, getting them singing from the same sheet of music. There are critics that say this is leading from behind, and he's letting the other nations kind of lead the way on the toughest sanctions. But he is steering and talking and engaging with all of these countries. So on that part of the speech and that part of the sanctions and kind of going down that road, I think he had some success. The rest of it really was lackluster, and you can't point to something that says this is going to change the dynamic. They had the ability, the moment, to shift, to make a decision. They're going to shift policy. You're going to go after independence. You're going to open up energy. You're going to do something big, swing for the fences. There was no swinging. There was no fences. There was nothing as far as big in this speech. Yeah,
that's a great description. Harris, one thing that stuck out to me, there was a key moment of silence, I should say, that we did not hear President Biden mention the 13 fallen. And look, I know you don't want to mention the lowest point in your presidency. I get that. No president does. But in my view, I wish he would have just given a slight nod to the 13 fallen in Afghanistan.
I don't think that is too much to ask that he would put that into a more than hour-long speech in terms of the substance of who you are as a president, as the commander-in-chief. I think you're right about that. And if anybody had any doubt if, maybe he didn't have time or whatever for certain avenues, I watched last night, and it at times to me, and I know he has a lot of crises going on, but I think it made more emphasis on that, on just how much has gone wrong in his presidency, to hit it like a laundry list. I mean, it's kind of like on the 4th of July when they have the last barge and the music is over, but they have to light everything. So they just put all those fireworks on display, and it's like a blue, a red, a gold, and none of it makes sense. I mean, after a while, I thought we are indiscriminately going down a list here of things that, look, definitely stick out in the polling as non-delivered items for him in terms of his agenda. The words, I'm going to secure the border. I thought I had hallucinated for just a moment there. And then he didn't go into how. And I know Senator Cruz and I were talking about this last hour. Well, was he going to secure the border with the wall? What was the plan going to be? But all of it was sort of touch, but don't go deep. Touch, but don't go deep.
Yeah.
Go to Ukraine, but don't go so deep that you would say that there would ever be a red line. And definitely tell them that military is off the table, which nobody wants to go to war, but don't you say that, all things are possible if, I don't know, I'm not a general, but we didn't go deep last night.
No, we didn't go deep. And Josh Rogan from the Washington Post, he pointed out there were a series of tweets of things that were not mentioned in the State of the Union. Check this out, Shannon. Syria, perhaps he didn't mention Syria because he has no serious strategy at all and has turned a deaf ear to the cries of the suffering there. Almost no mention of China. It's almost as if Biden was so focused on the near-term crisis, he's losing focus on the long-term. No mention of North Korea. Maybe it's because he doesn't have a plan with Kim Jong-un's growing dangerous and provocative actions. The list goes on. My point here, here's another one on Iran. Many of our adversaries weren't mentioned. Many situations on the world stage just simply did not make it in.
Mm-hmm. And that's something the president had been lauded for during campaigns, and as a multi-decade senator himself, that he was the foreign policy guy. And yet all of the polling shows us now that Americans increasingly do not trust him on issues of foreign policy. They weren't good things for him to bring up last night. And really, with everything he has on his plate, I don't think he wants to start anything with Rocket Man or anybody else out there, because it is a very full plate. It was interesting that he avoided those. There were just some clunky things. There were no segues. We're talking about one topic, and all of a sudden the next sentence is on to something else. Towards the end, he was doing sort of some of the weird rhetorical stuff he does where he starts sounding like he's screaming, and the ending that nobody can figure out. It definitely wasn't one of his best speeches, but with all the polling against him and domestically and internationally so many fires burning at this point, I think he just wanted to get it done and get out of there.
Can we just talk about two things? One is the over-under on folks it had to be about 35. 35, 36.
And look, the over-under on folks.
And then the end, to Shannon's point, God bless the troops, God bless America, and go get them.
Is that what he said?
Go get him.
That's what I wanted to know, because it sounded like he said,
go
get him, go get him, go get that. Yeah, I wondered.
Yeah, Emily, we were talking about that last night. What was go get him referencing?
I mean, who knows, right? Isn't that the answer to every question, trying to elicit clarity from that guy's speech? Brett mentioned the lackluster quality, and Shannon mentioned sort of the shouting. And shouting is no substitute for resolve or determination or seriousness. And those three things, in my opinion, were lacking in addition to any type of lucidity and clarity. His talking points were so exhausting when he moved on, right? So let's just get into the sort of extra X's and O's that we were talking about last night. They were exhausting because we keep hearing them, because they're overgeneralized and oversimplistic, like you're saying, because we've been hearing them since he was candidate Biden. He has never supported or failed to support with any type of policy or any type of achievement, because there has been none. And when he did reference things, he failed to take
infrastructure.
He failed to take responsibility for his policies' role in either exacerbating or creating it. So when he talked about the children's response from social media, right, and then their declining mental health, well, what about the absolute mental health decline from the pandemic? He talked about appointing a DOJ prosecutor for pandemic-related fraud. What about the fact that it was his bungling of the dissemination of those funds that created that? And finally, I thought, the too little, too late, distancing himself from the defund the police movement, I frankly found offensive. There's a lot more, but I know we're running out of time. But I had a lot of issues with that speech last night.
Just real quickly on infrastructure, when that was one of the things that he touted, that he got done. And in fact, that did get done. But the supply chain crisis then undercuts anything that you would immediately want to do on infrastructure in certain areas, right? And he didn't address how it wasn't, in fact, Santa Claus who was going to bring a resolution of supply chain issues that we have. We're not making enough in the United States. There was no call for any of that. Look, he had the time. That list was long. He could have slid in some substance.
Yeah. Well, between fund the police and secure the border, one thing's clear, it's a midterm election year.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Kilmeade. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to click to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page. This is the only way that I know for sure that you're not going to miss any great commentary, any great news bites, any great interviews coming your way on Fox. You can get it all here on YouTube. So subscribe right now.